standing as I am, or sitting as I am in the world, my friend Colette's, a good time to talk about colonization and exploration. Why? Why go there? Why go to the Atlantic? Why? I guess there is something inherent about human nature. We have to fill every space. If there's a space, we fill it. And that's not just a Yale, a misogynistic Yale chant. If there's a space, we'll fill it. If there was no space, then no people, Yeah. There's no space in space, otherwise we'd be filling space, Well, maybe there's too much space in space, and not enough, decent spaces. But the reasons why Europeans, I think, were so eager to engage in colonialism and sort of push out native peoples, I think was somehow related to the inherent failures of their own social systems. Once you have a very failed social system, where you have conditions where it's hard to succeed, and it's not from lack of wealth, because Europe has no shortage of resource, no shortage of wealth, but it's consolidated so few hands, and that was something that was very much a historical trend throughout the Middle Ages. For the 9th, 10th, 12th, 11th, what's going on up there, 13th, 14th, 15th century. More and more wealth is consolidated into hands, fewer people. And who left behind? Everyone else, of course. And they wanted a place for themselves. They wanted to be like the person they wanted to be. They had heard those stories of, Roman citizens, having rights and land long ago, before 4 times. And they also heard the stories of how the Romans got it. Colonization and slaughter. And enslavement. And they wanted it. So it was no surprise that sort of on the very edge of the world, the nations of Portugal and Spain were the first to seek out maritime routes, to seek their fortune, the great unknown, that was actually very well known by the people who lived there. And of course the British as well. So in the UK, I don't know how many people know this, over hundreds of years there was a process called enclosure. On the Colette's channel, I talk about it in my Diggers video. I talk about 17th century English Christian communism. More and more land in the public land, which was previously used by the peasants as well as the nobility, was being enclosed by the nobility, and farming was no longer viable. It was being replaced with herding of sheep for, of course, export. The birth of capitalism, as it were, where they were trading this wool with the great centers of Europe in the Low Countries and in Italy. In fact, like the Medici fortune was kind of built on trading with English wool. But there was a big problem. What about all those people who were left behind in this new economic system, who were disenfranchised by enclosure? Well, I guess they figured it would be a good idea to find sunnier climes somewhere, maybe in another part of the world. So in a sense, it was the failure of capitalism itself that people are left behind even as the wealth is increasing that leads to its greatest, let's say, success in the field of conquest. The British Empire was never a matter of like conquering the world in a sort of direct sort of fashion where they say, oh, we're going to set out and conquer this empire, and this. No, it was a slower process and a more loose and less organized process. British merchants would find themselves, trying to trade in South Asia, And their interest kind of meant they had to subvert local institutions through a little bit of, paying the maktub, as we say. And the same, it wasn't the British intent necessarily to conquer the Americas, Canada and the United States, but rather it was independent colonists fleeing essentially what they saw as the failures, or in many cases actually were the failures of their homeland, whether they are religiously or economically motivated. Primarily economically. I think the religious motivation is greatly exaggerated when it comes to American colonization. But the vast wealth that was created, exploited, sort of justified on the basis that, this land's a desert, this land's natural, tabula rasa. Of course, they didn't have access to the same information we know today, that the natives of the Americas were in fact quite adept at exploiting their natural landscape through slash and burn agriculture. But, and of course, the cost of this intensive European-style agriculture is felt on the East Coast to this day in the United States, but not as much as in Europe. It was still fresher for them than Europe. The natives, in fact, of the Americas kind of gave up on intensive agriculture for the exact reason. It destroyed the land, and they preferred to find some way of providing for their economic needs without exceeding the productive capacity in the long term. This, of course, changed with the introduction of the Europeans and high-profit commodities in North America. For example, the prized beaver pelts that set off so many wars. The natives obviously wanted European commodities, such as European firearms and others, such as hatchets. Also, European ceramics. European ceramics basically put an end to local ceramic industry in the northeastern North American continent on account of, not because the quality was higher, but because it was cheaper to trade for one with one's time after hunting for beavers than it was to produce your own local industry. As that's very often the case, I think global capitalism has a tendency to destroy culturally relevant industry for a much inferior form. This is a process that predates capitalism as well. Don't get me wrong. We see the same thing with Romanization, where mass-produced industry in ceramics and other artistic mediums, other things become standardized and lower in quality, but of course economically more viable. We're talking about now European colonialism, and the same thing of course happened in India. The economic viability of local Indian industry in the cotton and the textile trade was greatly strangled by British monopolization and opening of trade for industry. The quality of the textiles, of course, that was produced by the British was of a greatly inferior quality, and in fact incurred greater economic cost due to having the cotton grown in India exported to Britain, and then the finished product is immensely economically costly, but not for the producer, because the producer is seeing it in the form of capital rather than everything, the whole economic cost together, which is of course also the cause of climate change to a great extent. The enormous economic waste of shipping everything so we can say, oh, you have your tires made in Vietnam, your freaking steering wheel in Mauritius, your batteries in Taiwan, and it all goes together in the United States, of course, and then it is exported and sold to Mauritania. And this is an enormous amount of economic waste, but that you lose sight of the economic waste because it's economically more valuable in terms of strictly capital, which is the only consideration, I suspect this failure is going to produce greater and greater consequences as time goes by. This is the true, cause of climate change, of course, is the economic waste of capitalism, rather than personal consumption. People owning a car, even an SUV, is a very, very small drop in the bucket compared to the inefficiencies inherent in the capitalist system, and inefficiencies that could quite easily be remedied under a planned economy. Bye.